Some of the Afghans who have been able to escape Taliban rule will find a safe place in Uganda. The country is expecting to receive the first refugees this week and is preparing for their arrival. Uganda has agreed to a U.S. request to temporarily house at least 2,000 refugees before they transit to a final destination. Just before the show, I spoke with Uganda's Foreign Minister, General Jejje Odongo, told us when he expects the first refugees to arrive and how long that might stay.
Our discussions so far indicate that because of the evolving security situation in Afghanistan, particularly around Kabul, maybe the first lot of individuals should be expected here towards this weekend, and that we may have to keep them for between 2 weeks to up to 4 months initially.
Uganda already hosts almost 1.5 million refugees. You host the largest number of refugees in Africa. Who is going to pay for these refugees from Afghanistan in Uganda? And is that the Ugandan government or the American government?
First of all, you are correct when you say we are holding up to 1.5 million refugees here. As I mentioned earlier, this is basically because of our own experiences. We've been in exile before. We know the pain, the suffering, and the indignity of being a refugee. Secondly, we have a philosophy which gives us to understand that as a nation, in a community of nations, we have a responsibility to the international community. And so putting this together into consideration, we said we will accept to host these people. Our indication and our discussion so far show that the Americans will take responsibility to look after these people whilst they are here in Uganda.
I want to talk about a different subject, Foreign Minister. We had Robert Kyagulanyi, the former presidential candidate, Bobi Wine, in late June come to speak to us here on CNN. I want you to listen to what he told us.
He has rigged the election, switched off the internet, and like you put it, put me under house arrest, arrested, tortured, and murdered hundreds, if not thousands, of Ugandans. Indeed, my life is in danger in Uganda, but not just my life, but the lives of very many young men and women who dare to speak truth to power in Uganda.
General Odongo, why does Bobi Wine think his life is in danger and any of the young Ugandans who dare speak truth to power to the government of President Yoweri Museveni that you serve in?
I think this is an illusion. There is nobody in danger in Uganda. Everybody is free. In fact, if he was in danger, why is he able to insult and abuse and still be free in Uganda?
But he's regularly arrested. When he was campaigning, he was regularly arrested and beaten and detained. You are Internal Affairs Minister.
I want you to recollect that at the time of our campaigns, we were in the middle of a pandemic and we were in a lockdown. But we found out that we reconsidered and said, in spite of the lockdown, we must not jeopardize our democracy. So our Electoral Commission insisted that we will continue with the election, but under strict guidance on the basis of the standard operating procedures that had been instituted by the Minister of Health. Those standard operating procedures, some of them insisted that you will not have a crowd or a group of people of more than 200. Now, Mr. Kyagulanyi and his friends disobeyed, disregarded these regulations.
He didn't just disobey or disregard. He was sometimes arrested just leaving his house before he could actually go anywhere and hold a rally. That's not because of COVID. That is blocking him from addressing his supporters.
No, he was never arrested leaving his house. He was only during incidents where he had attracted and permitted himself to mingle with the large crowds.
You said that everybody is free in Uganda, and yet you, as Internal Affairs Minister, in March, presented a list to Parliament of 177 people who are under military detention. And later, President Museveni said at least 50 people had been arrested for treasonable acts of opposition. Is this the sign of freedom to you?
I think let's get our facts correct. It is true a number of individuals were arrested because of disobeying the standard operating procedures. Some were arrested because of the treasonous acts they got themselves involved in.
What do you consider treasonous acts? Is it being part of the opposition? A treasonous act is organizing to try and build an alternative government to that of President Museveni. A treasonous act is opposing President Museveni, a treasonous act.
All of those you have mentioned are not treasonous acts. Treasonous acts are completely different, and by any imagination that you know, by definition, treasonous acts involve activities that are injurious to the well-being and good of the country.
What does that constitute exactly? Because the way that is interpreted is very vast.
At the time of campaigns and at the time of elections, it was important to make sure that seditious acts, seditious publications are prevented from continuing to propagate so as to maintain peace and calm. It was a necessary security action that was taken.
But Uganda's constitution guarantees freedom of expression. When you block people from speaking openly and freely, wouldn't you agree that's a sign of an undemocratic country?
We do not stop people from speaking freely.
And yet Uganda just suspended 50 non-governmental organizations. Some of these have been critical of government. Some of these are very prominent human rights organizations. This is being criticized as an attack on civil society in Uganda. Isn't it, General Odongo?
These 54, for 4 years, have not been able to make their returns. Some of them have not bothered to register. Others did not bother to be licensed. So what did you expect the regulator to do? To fold its arms when people are deliberately breaking the law? They had to bring to book those who did not follow the law.
Is it coincidental that those who allegedly did not follow the law are those who were critical of President Museveni's government, those who have done work on the election monitoring, and those who are the most prominent defenders of human rights in Uganda? There's a pattern here of intimidation of civil society, General Odongo. Don't you agree?
I don't agree. In fact, if you examine those 54 carefully, not all of them are, as you claim, are critical of government. In fact, I can tell you, only this afternoon, I was at the bureau and I was looking at a number of them who had gone to seek to be forgiven so that they are allowed to continue to operate as they file their returns.
General Jejje Odongo, the Foreign Affairs Minister in Uganda.